In today's video, we're going to look at something called a steeple analysis. Most people will have heard of a pest analysis, and really a steeple analysis is taking the pest analysis and developing it. It's probably not something you will have heard of unless you are studying or have studied on a CIPD course, because it's something that they look for their students to have completed. So what is a pest analysis? First of all, the main purpose for carrying out a pestle steeple analysis would be that you are trying to analyse the external environment of your organisation. So you're looking to find out what's happening outside of the company or outside of the organisation, so that you can think about the things that might impact on the organisation and think about how, as an organisation, you might react. So being aware of what's happening, being aware of the challenges that you're likely to be facing, the disruption that could be brought to your organisation, being aware of these different things and then thinking about how they might impact on you, so that you can take that on board and plan accordingly. And that's really why you would do a pest analysis. And what I'm planning to do with this presentation is to take you through from a pest, how we get from pest to steeple, basically, and then we'll look a little bit at the kind of things that you should think about in each of the different elements. So, as I said, we can start off with pest, which is what most people will be familiar with, but I know that not everybody will be. But starting off with a pest, and you're looking at the political environment, economic, social and technological. We add on a couple of extra elements, and that gives us a pestle. So the extra letters here would be legal and environmental. And then, as ethical issues have become much more important to contemporary business and contemporary management, steeple is basically just the pestle with the letters jumbled about and adding on an extra E, and that E is ethical. So in the next slides, you can see I've basically just got a slide that gives us a breakdown for each of the different acronyms. So as I said, PEST stands for political, economic, social and technological. And what you're doing is you're thinking about what are the political factors that might be impacting on my business. So it could be, obviously it will vary depending on where you are in the world. It will vary depending on what type of organisation you're working for. So if you're working in the public sector, for example, where you are influenced quite heavily by the government, then the political factors might be quite important here. So it could be, if there's a change in government, the government agenda, what they're interested in, what they're going to be pursuing, will all be things that could fall under the political heading here. So being in the UK, being in Scotland, if the SNP win their next election in May, there could be an issue for whether or not we have a second referendum on Scottish independence. And if that were to happen, if Scottish independence were to happen, how might that impact on the businesses in Scotland? How might that impact on businesses that are trading with Scotland? Again, with Joe Biden winning the election in America, if you're in America or you're dealing with American companies, might that change in government there have an impact as well? Might it impact on how you deal, the relationships that you have with those countries? And with a pest analysis under political, you would also include any legal aspects. So if there's any legislation that needs to be considered that is impacting on your business, if a new piece of law has been introduced that affects how you treat employees, for example, then that would come under political as well. Economic can cover lots and lots of different things, from wage rates locally, unemployment, taxes, import and export duties if you're working abroad, any grants that are available to your organisation, anything at all that falls under an economic heading, you can put here. Sometimes elements can fit under more than one category, so don't feel that because you've already put something under political. So as I say again, because we're in the UK, Brexit, or the fact that Britain has left the European Union is definitely a political factor, but it will also it will have economic elements as well, because you're thinking about the import duties, the tariffs that are being imposed, the ability to trade with the European Union. So those things can fall under the economic heading. For social, you're thinking about changes and patterns in what society is looking for. So society's expectations, what they're looking for, what they're interested in, technology. Again, there can be an overlap, because sometimes technological changes and technological advances are driven by what consumers are looking for, what society is expecting. So if we expect to go to not going to be going to many hotels at the moment, but if you were to go to a hotel, what would you be expecting? You would expect a certain level of technology. Would you expect to have broadband in your hotel room? Would you expect to have Wi-Fi? What about television channels and things like that? All of these things, they are technology, but they're also being driven by what the customer is expecting, what the customer is looking for. So when you're thinking about these different elements, you have to think about, what's the driver behind it? Are a company responding to something because it's what the customers are demanding? One thing I want to say about all of these different analytical tools, whether it's Pestle, Steeple, you are thinking about the external environment. So you're always thinking about the company reacting to something that's happening outside of the company, and it's not something the company wants to do. So if the competition are doing something, or consumers are starting to go to the competition, how do you get them back? What is it that they're looking for that you're not giving them? And that could perhaps be a social trend, for example. But it's really, really important to think about what's the driver, what's making the people react. An example might be, if we think about, I'm sitting with a cup of coffee in front of me. If you buy a jar of fair trade coffee, then that company, its values are all built up round about ethical treatment of the coffee workers, the plantation workers, making sure that they're getting a wage that they can afford to live on, making sure perhaps by building schools to make sure that their children are getting an education rather than working on the plantations, that they're providing healthcare, so there's maybe clinics or something like that. So they're concerned with the welfare of the people, and that's a driving force for that company. So that's something that's internal. So if we were thinking about external factors that are driving the company to behave in a particular way, then thinking about Cafe Direct or any company that is driven by fair trade values, so cosmetics companies maybe not supporting animal testing or something like that, that's a value to that company. So it's something that's internal, so you can't consider that in these external analyses. If, however, you think about something like Nescafe, and they realised that they had to offer fair trade coffee, ethically sourced products, because it's what the consumers are looking for and it's what the competition are doing. So if they didn't respond, if they didn't think about how they were working with the farmers, for example, the competition is going to attract their clientele, so they're going to lose business. So the company are doing it, the company are taking on board the need to trade ethically because it's what the current consumer is looking for. So that would be a social driver because it's customer demand. Okay, so because they're doing it because of an external pressure, that makes it an external factor. So you have to be really careful when you're picking your factors to make sure that you're really, really clear about this is a social factor because it's what the consumers are looking for, it's what they're expecting, and it's an external factor because it's what the consumer is looking for. The company are responding and reacting to what the consumer wants, what the consumer is demanding, rather than it's something that the company believes in at its core. So I wanted to sort of go over that so that you've got an idea of what you should be thinking about when you're thinking about, is this an external factor, as well as is it political or economic or social or technological. So moving on from pest, it takes us to pestle. And as you see, we've still got the same four from the pest to political, economic, social and technological. But now we're also adding in legal and environmental. So if you're doing a pestle analysis, your ethical issues you'd probably put under possibly social, possibly environmental. Depending on where you place them, you could put them under a few different things. Legal is fairly self-explanatory, any laws that are being introduced, but also if you work in a sector that is highly regulated, for example, so perhaps you work in the pharmaceutical industry or the care sector, where there are regulations, there are oversight bodies that come in and carry out inspections to make sure that you're operating safely, that you're operating to standards. If there are any kind of regulations or regulatory bodies that control what you do and you have to meet their standards, then that would also fall under legal. Environmental can be pretty wide ranging. It can include things like carbon footprint, pollution, recycling, but it could also be weather. You know, there's a massive snowstorm that brings the country to a halt or brings your area to a halt and people can't get into work. Trading's not taking place. You can't ship goods anywhere. Then that would also fall under environmental. Potentially, you might also want to put COVID under environmental, but it will fall under lots of different categories as well, you know, in terms of how the different governments are responding, what they're seeing as being their priorities. It could have a political element. It's obviously having an economic impact because lots and lots of people are being furloughed, people are losing their jobs. There's a lot of insecurity. Companies are really struggling because they're not able to trade or not able to trade in the way they did previously. So there's an economic factor. Social, in terms of how this has impacted on us directly, how people are reacting, how they're responding. Technological, the fact that, you know, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all of these things are being used much more, that they've had to up their game to make sure that they're able to provide the service that the customers and the consumers are demanding. So just taking one thing, you can see how it relates to a lot of different categories. So as I say, just be clear if you are doing a pestle analysis or a steeple analysis, that you are clear why you think it's political, why you think it's economic. Those explanations, that justification is really important as well. So moving on from pestle, as I said, it takes us to steeple. And as you can see, we've still got the political, economic, social, technical, legal, environmental. I've not put them into the steeple order so that you can see how the letters, the different categories, are continuing from pest through to steeple. Obviously, this time we would start with social. With social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, and then ethical would be our final one. So ethical can be again, there may be a bit of overlap between ethical and environmental. Things like carbon footprint, is that ethical or is it environmental? But ethical will also be things that we're discussing already. Fair trade, how we treat employees, whether we are inclusive, whether we're discriminating, whether we support diversity. But it will also be about bullying and harassment, all sorts of different things. So the ethical can be quite wide ranging. And again, what you'll find is that some companies will do it because it's something they value and they believe in, and therefore that would be internally driven, so you can't include it in a Steeple analysis. But other times it will be they have to comply with the law, which to some extent would make it legal. But if they then think there's a business case for it, or they know that if they don't take action, if they don't provide ethically sourced products, the customers are going to go somewhere else. So, if they're providing ethically, if they're trading ethically, is it because they want to, or is it because it's what as consumers we're looking for and we're expecting? So hopefully this gives you a feel for the various different elements within Steeple. What I've got, I think, on the next slide is a table which gives you some indications of what could be covered in each of the different elements. And yep, there we go. So this is taken from a textbook, and as you can see, it takes us through, using the Steeple acronym, it takes us through what should be considered under each of the different headings. And that is me. If you have any questions, please feel free to come back to me with any questions you may have, and I hope you have found this helpful.